Good morning, good evening, depending upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, it is the CEO series. Our guest today is Dr. David Weill, former director of the Center of Advanced Lung Disease and Lung and Heart Lung Transplant Program at Stanford University. Currently, as the principal of Weill Consulting Group, he focuses on improving pulmonary ICU and transplant care. Dr. Weill is also the author of Exhale, Hope, Healing, and Life in Transplant, and the upcoming novel, All That Really Matters, which we just saw that video. It is an honor to have you on the show. I listened to you on another show a while back with a very good friend of mine, Dr. Tamara Beckford. And your story was so riveting, and this is why I reached out to her, because I wanted to have you on to talk about your career and how you started one way and the challenges of that. So welcome.
Thank you, Ron, for having me. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate having you here. So we always start the show in asking you about the career journey. You know, we graduate from university and we have all these plans. We're going to do all these things. So how do you start from there to becoming kind of a guru in the operating room, and then you pull back and said, let me do a pivot? Walk us through that.
Yeah, it started off pretty typical, and then it got atypical as time went on. I am the son of a nurse and a doctor. I always wanted to be a doctor. I started working in hospitals when I was 14 years old, and was pretty singularly focused on developing that skill set. I fell in love with transplant by happenstance. I was at the right place at the right time. And lung transplant in particular was in its infancy when I was training. And again, right place at the right time. And I spent my whole career focused on delivering complex care like transplant and figuring out how best to deliver it most efficiently, most effectively. But after about 20 years of that, I decided to take a pivot in my career for a number of reasons, both professional and personal. And I find myself in the second chapter of my professional life now.
I love the second chapter. I love that concept, the second chapter, because we all go through these pivots. And we are, I've talked to people, they're in their third or fourth reinvention of what they are. So that's kind of a normal thing today. What were some critical moments that caused you to decide that, let me make a U-turn, let me make a left turn, right turn, or whatever it was?
Yeah, I write a lot about this in my first book, Ron. I, again, had been doing transplant work for 20 years. It's physically very demanding, but more than that, it's emotionally very demanding. And, life and death is sort of a daily accompaniment, to work with me. I carried a waiting list of a bunch of names in my pockets for 20 years of people that needed a transplant. My own kids were growing up at the time, and I really wasn't around much. And when I was around, my mind was back at the hospital. But I think more importantly than that even was I wanted to see, rather than affecting a group of patients of my own, I wanted to see if I can impact the whole field, in a more comprehensive way. And so I started a consulting business about 8 years ago. And what we do is we do all things transplant. We help programs that are underperforming, whether or not it's clinical issues or administrative or financial. We help set up new programs, which is a big business, especially in the United States. And I work with companies that are doing things related to transplant, trying to help them innovate and see what's next, really.
Yeah. Yeah. What was a pivotal moment? You talked about your kids growing up. You were focused someplace else. And I know sometimes when you're around, I have 2 kids, and you're around them, and I have grandkids, and you're talking, and your mind is on something else, and you're not really in the moment. How did that kind of kick off?
Yeah, that concerned me because I never really figured out a way to do the kind of work I was doing, being totally devoted to my patients and their families, and be totally devoted to my family at the same time. I really never totally figured that out. And so I thought that as I was ending this 20-year run in the hospital, I was seeing our patients struggle at times. I would share in their losses, their successes, you name it. But I don't think I was giving my emotional self entirely to my wife and 2 daughters. And
Wow.
that was really a big reason why I decided to pivot. Fortunately, I had something professionally in mind that I wanted to do, not only the transplant related consulting, but also to write as well. I had a lot on my mind and I wanted to get it down on paper.
Yeah. Get it from here out too.
Yeah.
I always applaud people when they do that, because, when you in university, you talked about, this ladder, and you were going to go through all of this. But social media has kind of put it into a context that it's about getting to this pivotal moment. And that's all it's about. And this is one of the premises of the show, is to explore areas of causations that cause me to say, you know what, I need to rethink this. So I want to go to the book that, all that really matters was in read. I did download it already on Kindle. I did do that. So that was so interesting. So is that kind of you, John Bosco?
Yeah, Joe Bosco.
Joe Bosco. Okay.
And I've been asked that question: is the main character me? No. In short, I don't have quite as many issues as Joe Bosco has.
Yeah.
I didn't get into the same kind of trouble he got into. I didn't have the same challenges in life. But I will say this: all the characters in this book, including Dr. Bosco's, but the other characters as well, are inspired by real people. In other words, it was fiction, not science fiction. These are real folks that work in the hospital, and the situations I write about in the novel are real.
Based on that. So I call it a variation thereof of those people.
Yes.
Father was a doctor, mother was a nurse. You kind of gravitated towards that. 14 years old and knowing what you wanted to do. I find that phenomenal, because I had no clue. All I wanted to do was drive. I just got licensed at 14. So what happens when you are making that transformation, and the people around you, and you're trying to explain that? Was that a challenge, that you're going to pull back and you're going to maybe do something else?
It really was, Ron. I basically decided over the course of several weeks in the spring of 2016, that I was going to leave Stanford. And I led a team there of about 60 people. And I came in one morning, and I write about this in my first book, Exhale. And I sent an email out to 115 people that are associated with the program, including 60 team members, and said I'd be leaving in 6 weeks. And that was an extraordinarily short time. Most people that have a similar position, it's more like 6 months if they want to leave. But it was time for me to go. I recognized that, and I wanted to really move on to this second chapter. But I do think it surprised a lot of the people around me.
I can only imagine. I did a similar thing like that. I was sitting in my backyard in New Jersey, and I was reading, going through the New York Times. At that time, it was this thick. And I realized I don't enjoy what I'm doing anymore, and I'm going to go in on Monday morning and quit.
Yeah.
Do the same thing. So this is why I found what you was doing, but this decision you made was so interesting. So interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing how clear it became. As carefully as I cultivated my career and cared about it, it really became very clear to me that it was time to go.
Mm,
And I knew I wasn't really leaving the field per se, but I was just
yeah.
taking a different approach to it.
Wow, that's amazing. So if you were talking to so many young people are coming to teach a course here in Dubai, the American University of the Emirates, and you see these people with starry eye, and they're going through all of these kinds of things. If you had to talk to us a keynote at a commencement address, what kind of advice would you give them as to this whole thing about careers and this journey on this career?
I think, to my mind, you can have one career at a time, right?
Okay.
It's quite fine to think about, maybe what's next or what's the second chapter, third chapter, fourth chapter, but you really, I think, need to commit fully to whatever career you're doing at the time. So for me, my whole professional life was based on being the best transplant doctor I could be, and I
Okay.
committed fully to that. Now, all of what's happened since then has been an outshoot of being a successful transplant doctor. And I actually talk with a lot of medical students now, people that are considering medical school, residents, young doctors who've read some of the things I've written and reach out. And I tell them the same thing. I said, be a great doctor first, be great at what you do, whatever you do, and then opportunities will come your way. And I feel
Mm,
pretty strongly about that.
mm. So you were able to transition that into consulting,
Yeah, I
and
mean, it was pretty simple for me, Ron. I had to figure out. I knew that I was leaving the front lines of clinical medicine, and I decided that, and we all have this in our jobs. There's some things that we do poorly, and we don't like to do them. I got rid of all of those.
yeah, tell me about it.
There's some things you do well and you like to do. I kept those. But
Yeah.
even the things that I did well and I don't like to do, I stopped doing those. And
Okay.
I literally took out a legal pad and figured out what are the things you do well and you like to do. And I wrote them
Mm,
down.
okay.
And I think when you get to be age 52, when I walked out of Stanford, I think you have a pretty good sense of the things that you do well and you like to do. And you also have a pretty good sense of the things you do poorly. At least I
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. You did with that. So that team, when you sent that email out, the first thing I thought about, because I've been human resources, change management, all those kinds of things, the internal workers inside of organization. The first thing I thought about was change management. Because I thinking about a staff of X amount and they say, oh, so and so is leaving. Oh, what was the repercussions from that? How did you navigate the surprise and say this is the way it possibly will be moving or whatever it was? Walk us through what you felt after sending that email out.
Well, there was both personal and professional reactions to it. The personal ones were, and this was heartwarming, frankly. A lot of the team members first wanted to see if I was okay, if
Mm,
there was something going on,
yeah,
and that was nice, and my patients as well, because
yeah.
I had to obviously tell the hundreds of patients we were treating, thousands really, and they wondered if I was okay, and that was really nice. But I
Mhm.
also felt like it was an opportune time for me to leave because I was leaving, our center and our transplant program in good shape. We had gotten it to a place where it was operating smoothly and efficiently. We were providing great care. It was a well-oiled machine, and I was leaving it that way to the next person. But I think this is true in the business world as well. As I interact with companies of various sorts, they go through certain civilizations, and sometimes it's time for a new civilization and a whole different approach, and a new group of people comes in, and I think that's just the natural course of things. I don't think that should be feared in any way. I think it should be embraced.
Yeah, embraced. I was dealing earlier today with a client who was going through the same things you're talking about. New leadership came in, functions inside of the department, how to tighten this up and how to go through all of those kinds of approaches. And the challenge was that the C-suite as to how we're going to approach this. What advice would you give? And we're going to move beyond being the doctor, but I'm going to move into more of the executive level in adjusting to change, because change is scary to people. And I'm sure a lot of people in your staff was, what do we do now? Did you have a successor in place? What was the things that bubble up as a result of that?
I think a lot of it is reassuring the team members, whether or not you're in a corporate boardroom or in a hospital or on a trading floor. I think you have to reassure the people around you when you're going through this change. I think it's quite natural, especially when a leader leaves a situation or wants to take a direction in his or her own life, for the rest of the team members to think selfishly and appropriately, how is this going to impact me?
Yeah.
And I think the key is, when you're going through this kind of change, is to reassure each and every team member that they're going to be okay, that their job's stable, that things are going to work out. Mm-hmm. And I think it's best if you have somebody in mind you're going to pass the baton to, rather than leaving a void. So that was one of the things I was really interested in. There was a very natural person, second in charge, who was going to take things, from there. And I think it reassured everybody that finally you can see the rationale for having a deep bench. This is exactly what a deep bench is made for, is instances like this. And I think it really paid off for us.
So that kind of delves into the areas that I deal with: leadership development, succession planning, and all that. What did that come from? They don't really teach that in medical school.
No.
So no, they don't teach that in medical school. So how did you become this? I'm gonna say this, and I mean this leadership guru. Move away from the technical side, but the skills you had to develop that team, that people, when you sent that email out, was heartbroken because you were leaving, but you had someone in place. Those are fundamentals of leadership development, succession planning, and all of those. Where did that come from? Were you onto something, or what?
I had been lucky enough, I think, to be in leadership roles since I was young, and it was either on the sports field or in medicine or anything really. And to me, leadership really boils down to understanding human nature. I think you really have to understand the motivations and what's on people's mind, and be empathetic about the change, but be confident in it. And so one of my accomplishments that I look back on in my career was, I was kind of in the transplant world, a turnaround specialist, taking programs that were underperforming and trying to get them to perform. And anybody that listens to this that's trying to do that for a company or for a business of any sort understands that, it takes a certain kind of person to do that. You have to be kind of hard-headed, uni-focused. But I think you also have to understand, how are you going to get all these people that may not want to change a thing to row in the same direction? And I think it really boils down to, do they believe in you? Do they believe in what you're trying to do and your vision? And once you show them that, and not, with a bludgeon, but with a scalpel, to use the medical term, you have to show them that you're not going to beat them over the head with it, but they're going to follow you because you're leading by example. And I think that's really the key.
That's a great metaphor, the scalpel. That's a great metaphor, the way that you kind of guided that through. So as you made that transformation and you were able to build that up, and as you develop your team, what is your leadership style like when you're when you manage a large team, what advice would you give for leaders? And when you manage a team, you talked about empathy. And one of the key points that's coming up a lot now in research as it relates to leadership development, change management, there's a technical side, which is what you do, but there's also a people side, and we have to kind of manipulate and get those two together in sync to make it work. What does your leadership style look like? If you had to, what is your model of leading people?
I think it's really, Ron, can be summed up in 2 words, and I think this is key. And I see this in the companies I work with, but also in the hospital setting as well, as 2 words: commitment and fairness. I think that if a team of people sees the leader as being highly committed to the mission, willing to do whatever it takes, not asking the people that they manage to do something that he or she wouldn't do, I think that's the commitment that people respond to. But I also think fairness is a real key. And I see this out there quite a bit, where leaders treat people on the team unequally. They treat them in different ways. It doesn't look consistent. I think actually being fair to everybody, treating everybody equally is hugely important in leading teams.
So when you think about that alignment that you have in building those teams out, and all of the things that you've learned over the years, who was a mentor in your life? You talked about your mother and father, but I'm sure once you got to medical school, once you got into your first step into transplant, was there anyone there mentoring you? Or the role of mentorship is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I can tell you from early on, my mother and father had quite a bit of influence on me, especially since I was going into a field that they were already in. But
Yeah.
Coming from a sports background, I had a high school basketball coach named Billy Fitzgerald, who to this day is one of the most outstanding leaders I've seen in my career.
Wow.
He's doing all the things back then, when I was playing, 100 years ago, in the 70s and 80s, that I think are still relevant today. The commitment, the fairness. He had a saying, "Don't be good, be great." And I think that that's the kind of thing that we have too little of now. I think I'm all for the work-life balance, and I really truly adhere to all of it. What I don't want to see is that being taken to the point where it looks like light commitment to something.
Okay.
And that concerns me a little bit, because it's a pendulum, right? If all you talk about is work-life balance, then the life part probably takes over the work part at some point. I think at some level, commitment has to be the starting place, and then figure out where that balance exists.
Having that laser focus on whatever it could be as the finish line.
That's
because
right.
I've always kind of figured that you have that laser focus, and all of a sudden something piques your interest over here, and you explore that a little bit. Maybe not. Oh, I need to go this way, and kind of guide it from there. You mentioned your high school coach, because I played football in South Carolina, where I grew up, and my coach, Coach Armstrong, was an amazing individual. And it was always great for me whenever I'd go back home and my parents were still alive, and I'd go sit there sometimes with him, and we'd talk for hours and hours and hours. Just talking about life and what he instilled on people. So it kind of gave me joy that you talked about your coach, in trying to navigate this. And those were some of the underpinnings that you still pull from.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Sports teaches us so much. It can, especially team sports. And I think that background is something I used throughout my whole career. You're trying to get a group of people to pull in the same direction, whether or not it's on, the football field or the basketball court, or in a boardroom, or in the hospital, or wherever. It's pretty similar. And that's why I think you do see people with sports backgrounds, go on to do some great stuff.
Yeah, I want to do a shout out to a good friend of mine who listens in every week, John Self. He headed up a global executive search firm based on hospitals. And his comment was, in my 27 years of global executive search, I found precious few hospitals that invested in meaningful succession planning. Many CEOs. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I have a lot. I couldn't agree with John more. You know, hospitals are hospital administrations are interesting. You know,
Yeah.
there's a lot of turnover. There's a lot more hospital administrators now than there used to be. I mean, I've seen this chart. It's probably been shown a million times in various settings where the number of physicians in the United States is flat and the number of hospital administrators is going straight up. You know, and I'm not disparaging what they do, but I think it's a real comment on the healthcare system that we need so many people to administer it versus those that are at the bedside. You know,
Yeah.
I think that's a real reflection of where healthcare is.
Yeah. I had a challenge with a hospital that I was dealing with here in Dubai, and I was leadership development program for doctors and talking about some of the same things. And the person that killed the project was the head doctor. I don't know what you would call that person, was kind of the head doctor. Says, we don't need that. We need to, you know, they'll learn all this stuff. I've been doing this for 20 years and this is the way we do it. And to kind of kill the entire program, because he didn't want the younger doctors to be developed for more of a business context in trying to do that. So I understand what you're talking about. So the question I want to ask you is that as you came in on the lower level of the so-called org chart and you were able to navigate that to the top of the org chart, what techniques did you use to not only understand relationship management, but then how do you navigate that? But how do you develop people as you were moving up? People were coming into you, and all of a sudden you were the so-called big cheese.
Yeah. You know, I do think that in all industries, not just medicine, you start out being great at what you do. You know, try to master the technical aspects of doing your job, and therefore garnering the respect of the people around you because they know that you can do their job, you can do anybody's job on the team. I think the leadership part of it is a little trickier. You know, I think you mentioned this earlier. There's no medical school curriculum for this. There's no training for this. Doctors are no better and maybe no worse than anyone else at being elevated to leadership roles. But I don't think anybody goes into medicine and you know, tries to learn how to take care of patients and then says, well, my real goal is to be, you know, a hospital leader in some way.
Yeah.
I think most people go to medical school because they want to learn how to take care of patients. What happens after that, you know, is highly variable. I don't think that there was any one eureka moment where I learned how to lead people. What I do think you need is quite a bit of curiosity. I think that there's so many people in a business environment, company environment, hospital environment that know something about their area that you don't. And what I tried to do is find all those people in the hospital. You know, how do we get reimbursed for the work that we do? How does the hospital make money? How does it lose money? How does the payment system work? How do we get patients to come to our facility because we have a team in a home environment? All these questions, there's somebody in the ecosystem that's expert at those. And I would spend most of my days asking questions of those people because I wanted to understand all of it.
That's so key, because lots of times I talk to, a lot of my work is with senior leaders, and I'd say, what are you reading? What are you curious about? And sometimes I get a blank stare. And I'm thinking, you're leading a multi-million-dollar organization. There's no curiosity about even what's happening inside of what's the transformation point for your industry into the next industry? And sometimes I find I walk away and I'm thinking, well, how did I get to be in that position?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as simple as, you know, trying to talk to team members that maybe on the surface do a small part of the whole mission.
Yeah.
Ask them how they do their job, what challenges there are that they're facing on a daily basis, what obstacles do they have to overcome, what would they need to, do their job better. And I think if you ask those questions of people, they will then immediately think, well, the leader of this organization is interested in making the whole place better. In fact, they're interested in making it better for me.
Yeah.
And that's not such a bad thing to have the team members think.
Okay. So in your consulting practice, do you from kind of make the transition from medical technical side to people side of leadership? You ever get into those kind of conversations when you're in your consulting practice now?
All the time. I mean, in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm more coach than quarterback these days.
Okay.
And what really happens is you're dealing with team dynamics, right? I mean, no matter what you're dealing with team dynamics. Teams that are struggling usually have team dynamic issues. I mean, hardly ever does an underperforming anything, any kind of team, medical or otherwise, hardly ever do they all get along with one another. I mean, underperforming teams don't get along with one another, and they have team dysfunction. So a lot of times I'm coming in and trying to diagnose the dysfunction and then try to figure out a way out of it. And so I do a lot of that kind of work with teams now.
Yeah, I feel validated because a lot of the clients that I deal with, I always use that term diagnostics. So they said, we need to do this. I said, let's back up. Why do we need to do this? And I go through this entire questioning process. I said, Ron, do we really need all this? I said, yeah, we need this because if we get a thorough understanding of where we are, the challenges we're having, we can design a better product.
Yep. Yeah.
Because
I mean, and a lot of times it has, less of my being a transplant doctor and more of my being, a student of human nature. I mean, it's as much psychiatry as it is anything else.
Yeah. If you look back on your career, what would you say was the most significant lesson, if there was one or two, that provided you insight?
I think it was the time that I got to Stanford. So when I took the job at Stanford, I was asked to take the lung and heart lung transplant program there and turn it around. It was a mess.
Okay.
Not many people being transplanted. The people that we were transplanting weren't doing very well after the transplant. The team didn't get along. They didn't have enough team members. It was understaffed. It was like renovating an old house. And I think what was interesting is that first year we were kind of, I was leading an effort to kind of break it apart and put it all back together again. And what I learned the most about that is I couldn't just tell the team the breaking apart part of it. I had to tell them what it was going to look like in the end.
Yeah. The whys of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And here's what it is going to look like, not what I want it to look like. Here's what it is going to look like at the end of all of this. And we're going to have patients that want to be here. We're going to have people that want to be here. We're going to transplant people and send them back to their loved ones. We're going to study our field. We're going to train people in our field and mentor them. And that's what this is going to look like. And it's not going to take that long. And I would try to tell people that as much as possible rather than being focused on, well, this guy just came in from somewhere else and just started breaking everything apart.
Yeah. I had a conversation the other week with a leader, and I said, the whole MO of a leader coming in on the white horse, the old cowboy days, and comes in and just solving everything, that's over with.
Yeah.
That's over with.
I think so. And I don't think that people anymore, and tell me what your experience is, I don't think people anymore just say because you have some title that they're necessarily going to follow you. I think people are much more skeptical than that. They want to see what you've got beyond the title. And I think that's a challenge, especially now.
I call it the new dynamic, because when you talk to leaders and they say, well, the younger workforce is coming in with those, I said, this is your new customer, get used to it. figure out a way to get used to it and
Yep.
connect with it in some way. So you talked about that significant lesson that you've learned, the transition from, and you've come from a medical family. Was it a hard sell if you'd sit down and say, talk with your father, who's a doctor, and said, you know what, I'm thinking some different things, and mother and father, and here's what I'm going to do that. Was that a hard kind of conversation?
It was because I think a lot of times, and I'm a parent of two daughters, one who's just entered the workforce and one who's just entered college, and I think it's hard for parents to sometimes see that, look, I'm on the right path. I know what I'm doing here. I think what was lucky, what I had going for me is that I had an idea about what I really wanted to do, and it was just a matter of
Mm-hmm.
executing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the people around me accepted it. I think there were some people that were surprised that I was
Yeah.
leaving clinical medicine because I loved it. It was obvious that I loved it.
Yeah.
But I think that, it's always best if the people around you can be reassured that you have a plan. You're not just sort of flailing in the wind.
Yeah. I used the video at one time. There was um, I'm kind of involved a little bit in the hospitality industry here in Dubai. And there was a general manager of a hotel that was leaving. And it was the last day. He sent out the email, all that kind of thing. The last day he came into work, which was a normal day, parked his car. And the entire workforce, even people that were off, was there as he walked down the hallway clapping. And he was in tears by the time he got to his office. People came in on their day off to applaud this leader. And as we had a conversation, this was before the CEO series became live, it was kind of a questionnaire, and he walked through that. But you talked about some of the key points of that empathy, understanding people, listening to people, being curious as to why this wasn't working and all of that. And he built that connectivity. And it's amazing to see that video, because that's what leadership does. And that's how you can be successful in transitioning from here and moving to your consulting practice. Any thoughts on that? The impact that leaders have on people that work for them?
Yeah, I think, it's like back to a sports analogy. I've never met one I didn't like, but I think it's a lot like the coaching trees that are out there, right? You hear about, one big time football coach who's spawned off several different coaches, and now they're leading, their teams
Yeah.
somewhere else. I've kind of built my mentorship tree kind of the same way, where I want, my philosophy, to the extent that it has worked, to be implemented elsewhere. And I see that not only in the consulting work I do, but also in the people that I've trained. And
Mm-hmm.
there were people that trained me that wanted
Yeah.
the same thing, and it worked, for them. I think that that's kind of the legacy part. If you're running an organization, a business, a company, whatever, I think you always have to think about, how do we make it durable? How do we make
Mm-hmm.
what we're doing durable? And I talked about this a lot in our transplant program at Stanford, is after we're all gone,
Yeah.
how is this going to be sustained?
Yeah.
Let's make sure that it's not just dependent on David Weill being there.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be.
Yeah.
It should be something that will persist and endure well after you or I have left the
Yeah.
scene. And I think that
Yeah.
that's magic.
Yeah. One of the key points that intrigued me when I listened to your earlier interview with Dr. Tamara was that you said that you no longer use doctor. You're now David Will.
Yep.
You kind of said, okay, pass. I'm going to go with that. What was the thought behind that?
I think, especially as I started writing books, and, now I'm writing my third book that's about something that's not medically related.
Okay.
I don't want people to be confused by the MD after my name, because while I worked hard for that degree and I was very proud of it, I don't think that's it for me. I think that there's stuff beyond that I do now.
Yeah.
And especially when I write, I think it's important to know, I come at it from a doctor's perspective, but at the same time, I really want to emerge as somebody that looks at things more comprehensively than that.
Wow. There was during the financial crash, 2007, 2008, a priest in Greenwich, Connecticut, created a work group of laid off executives. These people were EVPs, SVPs, all the initials behind their name. And he wrote an article based on that. And he said what he got from this group in working in these sessions, the biggest challenge they were having was losing those initials behind their name, because they were known through the initials of being the SVP, CEO, and all. Now you were just Ron Thomas.
Yeah.
And he said in all of the coaching and counseling and all of that, that was the biggest hurdle they had to get onto. And I'm thinking, why would you get so caught up in initials behind your name? And this is what I said when you told that story. So powerful.
Yeah, it's kind of what I was talking about earlier, and it's what I'm writing about now, actually, is about identity. This is the subject of my third book: personal identity, religious identity. When we look at ourselves in the mirror, what do we see? And for many years, I got up in the morning and I'm looking in the mirror and I'm like, transplant doctor. Not husband, not father, not friend, transplant doctor. Yeah. And I think that I got really interested, in that subject, and that's why I'm writing about it. You have to be kind of obsessed with the subject to spend a couple of years writing about it. I'm increasingly fascinated by the people around me. Like, how do they identify? In other words, when they think of themselves, what do they think of?
Mm-hmm. I did a speech, and I was in Pakistan last week, and I did a speech. I got a standing ovation and all this kind of thing. And then I left and went back to my room, and you talk about looking in the mirror. I was drinking some water and looking in the mirror. I said, okay, what's next? Because don't get caught up in that whole applaud thing and all of that. I'm just a guy out here trying to make a living, doing what I do, doing what I love to do, and doing that without going through the accolades behind having that. But I always go back to that article that the priest wrote, because so many times in life we get caught up in status symbols and all these kinds of things.
No doubt about it. Yeah, and I write about this in both of the books, really. I spent a lot of time kind of subconsciously acting as a gratitude junkie. Yeah. I didn't get up each day and say, I can't wait for people to tell me how great I was. It's more subtle than that. We're feeding off of what people tell us and the respect. Yeah. And it drives us to do better. And then they tell us some more, and then it drives us to do better. And we spend all of our time, chasing this. I'm growing out of that a little bit, but I think it's always going to be a part of me.
Yeah. It'll always be a part of it. So, we're coming up on the end of our session, and I want to thank you for being a part of the show. I find your career so interesting, and as I said, I've already read I've already ordered I've already got the download, of the book. So the name of the book is All That Really Matters. What is your next book coming up? What is that? Next book?
It's going to be out in late 2025, so about a year from now. It's a book about exploration of identity, personal identity, religious identity. Okay. And I'll go back to nonfiction this time. But I sure enjoyed writing the novel. It was great to explore some of the themes that I'm interested in a fictional form.
Yeah. Do you find that sometimes, because I tend to write a lot sometimes, do you find that you just letting it out? I'm letting some of the air out because I'm taking it from here or wherever and I'm just getting rid of it and I'm putting it someplace else.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I find some time, at times, especially now as I develop as a writer, I'm trying, it reminds me very much when I was learning medicine. I'm trying to, get better at this. I find some of the things I write surprising, like I didn't know I thought that. And, I
What
go
an
back,
excellent.
yeah, I go back and read it and say, wow, that's interesting. I didn't, and I think that's what's a great, part of all of this. So there's something about putting all of this on the page that really gets us to
Yeah, yeah,
reveal what matters most to us.
yeah, yeah. So one of the goals of the show, as I mentioned earlier, is that we bring people on who have achieved, I'm putting that in quotes, the so-called ultimate top of the pyramid. But we always love to explore the transition points, U-turns, and all those kinds of things. And today you gave a master class in how this could be done. You brought up the mission, and we hope that you enjoyed being. Are there any last minute takeaways that you would like to give the audiences about either identity or how do you move from a position that you're stuck in now?
It's really cliche, and I hate to even indulge the cliche, but I tell my daughters this too. I don't know that there's any grand strategy to any of this. I really think that you do need to follow your heart. And again, I apologize to your listeners for the cliche, but it's
That's okay.
amazing. It's amazing how when you do that and you figure out what you're passionate about and you commit to that, it's amazing how the rest of it seems to take care of itself. Maybe I'm just fortunate, but whenever I've followed my heart, whether or not it's being a transplant doctor or now being a writer, when I follow my heart, I'm in good shape. When I'm not doing that, when I'm actually following somebody else's dream,
Yeah,
that's when I struggle.
yeah. That's where the problems come in. So thank you so much for being a guest. I want you to hang on for a minute as we begin to close out. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
David.
Ron, for having me. I enjoyed it.
Okay.
Take the CEO series with you anywhere, anytime. All episodes are now available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and major streaming platforms. It's not just an interview. It's a masterclass in leadership.